My name is Sapna Keel. I'm also one of the members of the Council for the American College of Physicians and co-chair of the Women in Medicine Subcommittee. We're so excited to have this topic that's near and dear to many of our hearts, and I think can't wait to hear what Dr. Liu has to say about this. So I am honored to be introducing Dr. Liu to you all today. Dr. Stanley Liu is an assistant professor at the University of Maryland School of Medicine and a practicing general cardiologist. As an assistant program director for the Cardiology Fellowship Program, he started giving talks to his fellows on essential personal finance topics. Demand for his talks grew, and so they're now part of the University of Maryland School of Medicine curriculum, as well as local and regional conferences. He has been recognized for his ability as an educator, as the 2020 winner of the Leonard Tao Humanism in Medicine Award and the 2021 Distinguished Lecturer for Pathophysiology and Therapeutics at the University of Maryland. While not at all a financial professional, Dr. Liu is dedicated to improving the wellness of his fellow clinicians through compassionate and pragmatic financial education with no financial conflicts of interest. Take it away, Dr. Liu.
All right, thank you so much for the invitation and for allowing me to speak to you guys. The topic of tonight is financial wellness, which is the intersection between physician wellness and financial literacy. And I think this is a topic that we don't discuss enough. This is going to be an interactive talk. I'm going to ask you all to participate in audience polling. So if you see, what I'm going to put is in the chat, you will see a link to the Poll Everywhere site, and you will be able to, when you hit that link, that'll take you right to the polling site. Alternatively, you can see the QR code on your screen. If you use your smartphone to use that QR code, that'll also take you to the polling site. So I'd like to ask all of you to take a minute to do that just now, because I'm going to warm up with a polling question for all of you. Now, thank you, Omicron variant. Because of that, I cannot meet any of you in person, and therefore I don't know who you are. Please take this chance to tell me who you are. What best describes your current career stage? You can use that website. You can also use the texting function and use text messaging to answer. Or for those of you who missed the QR code, here's the QR code. You can take another look here with your smartphone if you prefer to do it on your smartphone. So I'll just give everyone a few minutes to go ahead and do that and answer that polling question, so we all have a sense of who the group is here tonight. Okay, all right, very mixed group, and wow, a third of you are medical students. Seriously, that's not what I was expecting, but that's great. As you can imagine, the financial topics and wellness priorities are different for everyone in each stage of your career. And I will try to highlight which topics are more relevant for people in which stages. So with that, let's begin. There are 4 main learning objectives that I'd like to achieve for tonight. One is I really want to make the case that wellness should be the sole focus of all the financial decisions you make in your life. I want all of you to understand the pros and cons of student loan refinancing and public service loan forgiveness in 2021 and 2022. This, of course, is more relevant for those of you in training or the students or an early career, hopefully. Third is I would like every single person in this audience to commit to one day being able to work purely because you want to and not because you have to. And this talk will help you learn how to pull that off. And then finally, I want every one of you to be savvy enough to work with someone in the financial industry without being fleeced. So let's begin with our first topic. Make wellness the sole focus of your financial planning. Now, there are 3 important wellness questions I want you all to ask today. One is why? What is your mission? The second is how? What is your strategy to achieve that mission? And third is what? What are the tactics you are going to do such that you follow that strategy. So let's start with why. And I'd like to ask all of you a very, very personal question. Why did I sacrifice the best years of my life and spend so much money to become the physician I am today? Or for you medical students, why are you sacrificing the best years of your life and going into so much debt to become the physician someday? I'd like you to take 10 seconds and try to answer that question for yourself privately. All right, now, if you are finding it hard to answer that question in 10 seconds, that unfortunately means that you don't really have a North Star to guide your wellness journey. Many physicians who don't spend the time to think about this end up with a life and career that ends up being very far from the ideal they want. Now, your why will inevitably change as your life and career changes as well. What's important is to be cognizant of that and to update your why and live accordingly so that you don't veer off course. And this does not have to be a very complicated thing. I'll give you an example. Here is my why. And I won't read it to you, but this just gives you a sense of how simple this can be. And what it is a North Star, a guiding North Star for every decision you make in your personal and professional career. So that's why. Let's go to how then. If you know your why, how do you make your why a reality? How do I ensure that I will have a satisfying physician, personal and professional life as a physician? One of the most critical pieces is to clearly understand your why and let it drive every decision that you make. Every time that you say yes to a commitment of time, energy, and money, you're saying no to something else. And it's critical to let your why drive what you say yes to and what you say no to. Now, for tonight, we are, of course, going to focus on the financial side of things. No matter what your why is, financial realities are really going to ultimately determine whether your why will ever actually happen in your lifetime. So let's now go to the what, your tactics. What do you actually have to do that will follow that strategy? What do you need to accomplish in the next year? How about this month to meet that goal for the year? How about this week to meet the goal for that month? This is what we're going to be talking about tonight. And the whole idea is that if we're talking about finances, we are talking about making your financial reality in power rather than derail the life that you want to live. But make no mistake, this is about wellness. If you want to live your why, you need a strong financial game. And if you want a strong financial game, you need solid financial literacy. But I want to make the point that if you don't know your why and you haven't thought through your how, you'll never do the what that we're about to discuss. The rest of this talk all has to do with what, but it is not the most important part. The most important part is thoroughly understanding your why and your how. With that limitation in mind, let's start talking about the what's. So we've talked about where wellness fits in your financial planning. Let's now talk about student loans. And what I would like to do is give you guys an update on the pros and cons of student loan refinancing and public service loan forgiveness. Now, this is a big topic, so let me give you a quick outline of what we will be discussing. We'll talk first about public service loan forgiveness, which will obviously be more relevant to those of you in training or an early career. We'll talk about refinancing loans, and then we'll talk about the 2021 to 2022 limited waiver of the public service loan forgiveness programs, which may be a game changer for those of you who are in the early or mid-career, if you are in an academic or a federal setting. Now, keep in mind, this content is changing all the time. So it's accurate of today. It may not be accurate in the future if you are watching a video of this presentation in the future. So let me start with a polling question here. How much is your current student loan balance? And if you missed the QR code, I will give you the QR code here one more time. And I'd like to encourage everyone to participate so we can get a good sense of who we are as an audience. And this is 100% anonymous. Okay, let's see what we got. Okay, About 40% of you have 40% of you have a loan balance of zero. Wonderful. And this looks like actually kind of a bimodal distribution, right? Where you have 40% have no loans and 23% have over 300,000. Okay, so this obviously applies to some of you, but not all of you. Let's talk a little bit first about public service loan forgiveness. Let's talk about this program in a nutshell. The basic idea is that you make 120 monthly on-time payments while working full-time at a 501c3 nonprofit organization. That's just the IRS code for this. And yes, what that means is every residency and fellowship program in the country is at a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So every payment you make while in training, that counts toward those 120. But there are some additional restrictions. You must do so under one of the set income-driven repayment plans, such as revised pay-as-you-earn, or income-based repayment. And after you've hit those 120 qualifying payments, which is 10 years, whatever loan balance you have is then forgiven tax-free. Another important limitation, only direct federal loans are eligible for PSLF. And I'll talk about what that means and why that distinction matters. Now that sounds great. There are some very important downsides that we need to talk about for PSLF. First is that income-driven repayment means that you pay a lot less on your loan than normally would be expected, because when you are in training and you have a lower salary, they allow you to get by paying less without defaulting. But the flip side of that is you're paying very little principal on that loan. And what that means is that unpaid interest continues accruing the whole time. Your loan balance is actually growing. So if you got to the point in your life where you changed your mind about PSLF, you now owe all of that unaccrued interest. That's a very big deal. You may end up staying, as a result, longer at a 501c3 job that pays less than you want to. There's also another real downside, the hassle factor. I'm sure all of you have heard in the news all the problems with PSLF, and their record keeping has been notoriously unreliable. So if you are doing this, I really hope you are keeping very accurate copies and confirming every loan payment as you go. And of course, there is the real risk that the program could be changed or canceled by Congress at any time. Because this was made by the government, it could be taken away by the government at any time. So that's PSLF in a nutshell. Let's now talk about refinancing, and I will bring these two topics together in a second. Refinancing is basically when you let a private company buy out your loan and then redistribute that loan to you with new terms, usually with a lower interest rate or a lower monthly payment. And there are a lot of great things about that. It can let you save thousands or tens of thousands in interest payments if you are able to refinance to a lower interest rate. And there has never been a better time to get a low interest rate than now. You can customize your loan term and payments based on when you want to pay that loan off. This is a really hot market. There are lenders all over the place and they compete. Some will even give you cash bonuses. And you can refinance multiple times. There are people I know who will refinance multiple times at different places to get those cash bonuses. All right, it's a lot easier than refinancing your house mortgage. Now, this all assumes that you have decent credit and you can qualify for the best interest rate. So if you have credit issues, this probably is not a great idea. Now, let's talk about the cons of refinancing. You become ineligible for a lot of benefits that you would otherwise have as a federal student loan borrower. You become ineligible for deferment or income-driven repayment that you might have as a holder of a direct federal loan. You will become ineligible for public service loan forgiveness if your loan gets bought out by a private company, because the private company is not going to be offering you loan forgiveness. And right now, those of you paying loans are still enjoying the 0% interest of the CARES Act, and that relief will end in a little over a month. But if you were to refinance today, you would become ineligible for that relief. And there are some other benefits. If you die or become disabled when you have a federal student loan, that loan can be forgiven. That may not be the case if you refinance with a private company. They may or may not give you that benefit. Now, these cons are really only if you have federal student loans. If you have private loans already, these are non-issues. If you can get a lower interest rate, go ahead and refinance away, right? These cons are purely for federal loans. So suppose you're in a situation where you have high interest federal loans, and you could potentially refinance to lower interest loans. Should you do it? The short answer is, if you're not an attending or you're about to be, probably not yet. The longer answer is that there are two major factors to consider. One is your attending debt to income ratio, and the other is how likely you're going to go for and qualify for public service loan forgiveness. Let me define the term debt to income ratio. And I promise you this will be very simple math. This is simply your student loan balance at the time of graduation divided by your annual attending salary. So for example, if your student loan balance is $150,000 when you finish training and your salary as a new attending is $150,000 a year, your debt to income ratio is 1, right? 150,000 divided by 150,000. So let's look at what those numbers actually look like. Let's say this is your situation and you have an interest rate of 5%. In your first year of repayment, you're going to owe $7,500 in interest in your first year. And if you look at that in relation to your salary, that's about 5% of your salary. You will need to spend 5% of your gross salary a year just to stay even and keep your loan balance the same. Now, suppose we tweak these numbers a little bit. Let's say instead of making $150,000, you were making $100,000, right? Let's say you were in academics or something that's lower paying. Now your debt to income ratio is 1.5, and you will still owe the $7,500 in interest, but this hurts more. This is now 7.5% of your salary just to stay even. You're going to feel this more because more of your monthly paycheck is going to this. Now, let's suppose your loan balance is even higher. Let's say it's $200,000 and your debt to income ratio is 2. Now you're going to owe $10,000 in interest, and that's really going to hurt. That's a full 10% of your gross salary a year just to stay even. Now, why am I bothering you with these numbers and with this esoteric term? Well, because this really matters. This ratio really affects your life. Let's say you want to be debt-free after 10 years with 5% of interest. This is what it's going to look like. If your debt to income ratio is 1, but you'll need pay about 13% of your salary. Conversely, if your debt to income ratio is 4, it's going to be all the way to more than half of your gross salary. So my personal opinion, if you are a medical student or a resident and you're thinking about the next steps, public service loan forgiveness starts looking pretty good when your debt to income ratio is greater than 2. So a lot of you, as you're thinking about your first jobs coming out of training, and I'm addressing those of you who are medical students and residents, you may need to make a decision about refinancing versus going for public service loan forgiveness. This is a framework of how you might want to think about it. On the refinance side, that might be a great option if you have a low debt to income ratio, because you're better off just paying that puppy off rather than paying the low payments and accumulating all that interest. If you know you don't want to do academics, you're not going to be at a 501c3, refinancing makes a lot of sense. And also, if you haven't made a lot of qualifying payments in residency or fellowship. On the other hand, if you have a really high debt to income ratio, you're 100% set on academics, you already have an academic slot waiting for you. Plus, if you've made qualifying payments throughout residency and fellowship when your payment's super low, that might push you more toward PSLF. And that's especially the case if you go through a very long training period, right? Like let's say you're med peds trained, and then you do cardiology, and then you do an interventional fellowship, and then you decide to get critical care board as well, and you're PGY9 when you graduate. Then you only need 1 more year of academics and your whole loan balance is forgiven, right? So this is a pretty good deal if you're in that situation. So a take home then, should you refinance? Simple way to think about this. If you have private loans that otherwise wouldn't qualify for any federal benefits like PSLF, go for it. You got nothing to lose. If you have direct federal loans, consider it only if you are 100% sure you're not going for PSLF. And usually that means you're an attending or you already have a job lined up for you. Now, For you mid-career docs who've been feeling left out, I'd like to address you right now. I want to spend 3 slides on something very kind of late breaking, the PSLF limited waiver. This is relevant for early to mid-career academic or federal physicians who are still paying back federal loans taken out in the 1990s and 2000s. For you, and I guess I fall in this group too, PSLF has been pretty irrelevant. And that's because only direct federal loans have been eligible for PSLF. And you have a direct federal loan if your loan payments are made directly to the Department of Education. Now, those loans only really started originating commonly in 2010. So if you graduated medical school before that, PSLF has not been a factor in your life. The older loans that you might have taken out there are called the FFEL loans. And you have an FFEL loan if your loan payments is made to a bank or a financial institution, as opposed to the Department of Education. And if you made payments that were outside an income-driven repayment plan, those payments were not eligible. Until now. What has changed with the October 6, 2021 limited waiver is this. They have significantly loosened the restrictions on PSLF. Any loan payment you have ever made on an older loan, an FFEL loan, a Perkins loan, or other federal loans, they now count retroactively toward the 120 qualifying payments if you made it while working full-time at a 501c3. And that means anything you did, any payments you made during residency, fellowship, and while you were at a 501c3, like an academic center, a VA, or a rural health or military center. Those are all eligible. And any loan payment counts. You did not need to be in that repayment plan. Doesn't have to be a full payment, doesn't even have to be on time. So this is a huge game changer because overnight with this limited waiver, there are a lot of academic docs who could get their loans completely forgiven and they have no idea. So please spread the word about this. If this applies to you, this is what you have to do. You go to the studentaid.gov website that talks about the PSLF limited waiver. You consolidate your older loan to a direct federal loan, and then there's an application process to get eligibility for PSLF and to receive retroactive credits. And there is a deadline. You have to do this by Halloween 2022. So you have a little under a year to do that. Okay, so again, that's the limited waiver, and it's relevant to those of you who are in academics or a 501c3, and you took out loans in the 1990s and 2000s that you're still repaying. So that's our second objective, an up-to-date way to think about student loan refinancing and public service loan forgiveness. Now let's get to the fun stuff. I want all of you to be able to commit to working because you want to and not because you have to. Let's talk about how you get to that point. What we're really talking about is something called financial independence. Let me define that. What that means is your assets generate enough income to cover your expenses. Let me translate that. In plain English, that means work is now financially optional. Now, usually when people talk about financial independence, they're talking about retirement, right? Because financial independence, it's ideal if you want a comfortable retirement, right? Because by definition, you don't want to have to keep working when you're retired, right? That doesn't really work. But there's no reason that you can't be financially independent before retirement. And what that might give you is a lot more control over your life. Suppose you wanted to cut back so that you can make your kids sports games, or you wanted to take a lower paying job that is more meaningful. If you have the ability to make work financially optional or even partially financially optional, you now have a lot more leeway to define your career and to make your why a reality. So for that reason, I prefer saying invest for financial independence instead of investing for retirement, right? The third of you who are medical students, you're not thinking about retirement, you're thinking about your first job. But all of you, I hope, want to be financially independent someday and work because you want to, not because you have to. So let's do a quick thought exercise here. I'm going to give you 2 scenarios, and I'm going to ask you which one is going to be financially independent first. Let's say you have a teacher who makes $40,000 post-tax, And on the other hand, you have a doctor who makes $400,000 post-tax. Let's say this teacher invests $4,000 a year and spends or lives off the rest. The doctor has a lot more to work with and invests $40,000 a year and spends and lives off the rest. Let's assume they all invest in the exact same investments. They get the same returns. Remember, financial independence is when your annual income from your investments is enough to cover your annual expenses. Which person is going to be financially independent first? And I'd like to engage you guys all in another polling question. So, who will reach financial independence sooner? The teacher, the physician, they will tie, or you have no idea? And again, just for convenience, in case anybody needs it, QR code again. All right, let's see what you guys got. Okay, kind of all over the place, but the majority of you favoring the teacher, right? Probably because that's probably where you guys are good test takers and you think that's where I'm going. Okay, well, the correct answer is that they're going to tie. They will all reach financial independence at the same time. And if you do the math, that's about 51 years. Now, that might be great if you're a teacher coming out of college and you're starting at age 23. But if you are finishing residency at age 30, you probably don't want to hit that point of financial independence in your 80s. That's a long time. Let me go through the math so I can show you what I mean. All right, here were the two scenarios. Let's go through the teacher first. The teacher invests $4,000 a year, and that means they have a $36,000 a year lifestyle that they're living. A common rule of thumb is that you can reach financial independence if you've accumulated 25 times your annual expenses. So for that teacher, they would need to accumulate about $900,000 to be financially independent. Now, the doctor's living a little larger, right? They have a $360,000 a year lifestyle. And to maintain that, they're going to need to accumulate $9 million to be financially independent. Now, obviously, they have vastly different lifestyles, but their dependence on their work and their stress about when they can come back or whether they need to work harder and moonlight is going to be the same because they will still have that relative need for more funding. Now, suppose the doctor invested a little bit more. Let's say instead of investing $40,000 a year, they invested $80,000 a year. All right, boo-hoo, they must now fund a $320,000 lifestyle instead of $360,000. They have to really cut back. And if you do the math, that means they still need to accumulate 8 million to be financially independent. Now, 8 million, 9 million, they're both kind of crazy, stupid high numbers, right? So it doesn't look like a huge difference. But if you look at this from a perspective of time, let's look at it from the teacher and the doctor perspective. The teacher, we told you, that is 51 years of investing and working to hit that point. For this doctor, the time has now gone down to 37 years. That difference of $1 million is equivalent to 14 years of a working career. 37 years, this is doable for someone coming out of their training in their 30s. So the main point I want to make here is that, especially in your early career, your savings rate is the most important determinant of when you can be financially independent. And this is just how the math looks. On the far left, this is if you were to save nothing, you spent every second you ever earned, you'll never be financially independent. On the far right, suppose you live in your parents' basement, they feed you, you don't have any expenses, you can quit now, right? Work is completely optional, you're totally financially independent. Most of us are somewhere in the middle. And the common wisdom you often hear in the financial media is to save 10%. For us, that's just not enough because we start later in our careers. If you start in your 30s and you want to retire before age 70, invest at least 20% of your gross income for financial independence. If you want to be financially independent before that, you got to do more. That's just how the math works, right? And remember, it's the savings rate, not the savings amount. If you make $400,000, you better be investing way more than your colleague who makes $200,000. Now, for those of you who are new to the idea of investing, I've hopefully convinced you that this is important. Now, how do you actually do this? How do you actually invest? Usually, the way people approach investing falls in a continuum between a more hands-off and simpler option to a more hands-on and potentially lower cost option. Usually people think on the far left, we're talking about hiring a financial advisor. A little bit more in the middle, you might use a robo-advisor like Wealthfront or Betterment, that kind of thing. You might invest in target date funds in your 403b or your 401k, or you might do this manually where you pick and choose your own investments, right? Now, most people, if you are beginning your career as an investor, and I hope every single person here realizes that they need to do this, the left side of the screen probably seems a little less intimidating, right? So that takes us to our fourth learning objective. How do you work with a financial advisor without being fleeced? Now, I'd like to ask you another polling question at this point. Based on what I've talked about so far, I want to ask you a true or false question. I am seriously considering a major financial move based on what I've learned so far in this talk. Take a second, just think about what we've talked about, process a little bit, and then answer honestly, true or false. Yes, I've been inspired to make a change in my life and now I have an idea what to do, or false, this doesn't apply to me, or I got this already. Okay, let's see the results here. Okay, about 60-40-ish. All right, wonderful, great. All right, I have some really bad news for everyone who answered true. If you answered true, you're probably not savvy enough yet to work with a financial advisor. Normally, when I give talks, I put my disclosures in the beginning. For this talk, I've intentionally waited to give my disclosures now, because there are a few things you need to learn about me before you act on anything I've told you so far. First, I have zero formal business, finance, or accounting training. Right? I have a license to practice medicine, and I have a license to drive in the state of Maryland. That's it. Nobody at ACP has ever questioned whether I'm qualified to give you this talk, and nobody has vetted any of my content or fact-checked it. And if you were to make a decision based on what I've presented so far, and it turned out to be a really bad idea, I am not affected, I'm not remotely responsible or liable. So I don't know if that changes that 60-40 ratio, but hopefully you should have some serious doubts about my credibility in giving you this talk. And the lesson I want you to take away is to never take financial advice from anyone unless you know what's in it for them. Never take financial advice from anyone unless you know what's in it for them. Ask yourself, do you know what's in it for me, this random guy on your Zoom screen talking to you over the internet? Let me tell you what's in it for me. I'm weird. I'm a money nerd. I actually think this stuff is fun, right? Like I get excited about this stuff, right? I am not normal like most people. But what I am passionate about is financial wellness. I really do believe it's necessary for both a satisfying personal and professional life. And I truly want that for all my physician colleagues. And the nice thing about me being a non-professional is that I have zero conflicts of interest and I have nothing to sell you. I gladly give this talk for free in hopes that it will better change the quality of your life. Let's talk about how financial advice works. Anybody who sells financial products can call themselves an advisor. And all of us in the medical community, we are marks for advisors. We're like big game trophy. And there's a reason for that. We currently or eventually make big bucks, but have no idea how to manage it. We're very insecure about money and they know it. And we also tend to have big egos. So this is ripe for exploitation here. We also genuinely assume that they want to help us, right? Just as we genuinely want to help our patients. So if you ever get a cold call from a financial advisor, realize that you are getting called because they have identified you as a potentially profitable client. If you are a medical student or a resident and a financial advisor or company gives you a talk for free, they may even provide lunch or dinner or something, it's because they want to try to get you in as a client who's going to make them a lot of money over the long term. That's not necessarily bad. That's just how it works. So what I want to spend the next few minutes talking about is how financial advisors get paid. We all know as physicians that how we get paid can influence how we practice medicine. If a hospitalist is paid on an RVU basis, an eat what you kill model, they may practice somewhat differently from somebody who is completely salaried and their income does not depend on how many tests they order, how many procedures they do, right? We all know that. The same principle applies for the financial industry. Let's talk about some of the common ways financial advisors are paid, and this is not always obvious. One common one is commissions, right? When you buy a mutual fund or an insurance policy from the financial advisor, they get paid a commission as the person who sold it to you. And as you can imagine, the incentive then is to sell you expensive products. The bigger the life insurance policy or the bigger the investment they get you to make with them, the more money they pocket. And that also means they have no incentives for your investments to do well. If you buy a terrible product or you invest in something completely inappropriate, even if your finances tank, they've already pocketed the money. They don't really care. A second very common way financial advisors are paid is something called the assets under management or AUM model. And the idea is that an advisor who manages your money, they get paid a certain percentage of your investment portfolio yearly. A common one is 1%. So for example, if a financial advisor is managing $100,000 of investments for you, their yearly fee is about $1,000. Now, if you think about what this does for their incentives, now there's a little more alignment, right? If your $100,000 becomes $110,000, the next year they're going to make more money, right? If it becomes $90,000, they're going to make less money. So they want your investments to do well, right? They're on your side here. But it is not quite that simple. Suppose now you are asking the financial advisor, hey, what's better with this $10,000 I have in my bank account? Should I invest it with you or should I put it toward my student debt and try to pay it off? Which one is going to pay them more? They have a conflict of interest. They make more when you invest with them rather than doing other financial priorities such as paying off debt or putting money in your workplace 401k. So you have to think about that when you are taking the advice of somebody who's paid in an AUM model. And then the other thing you have to think about is value. Suppose you do go with this financial advisor, and then 10 years from now, your $100,000 portfolio is now $1 million. They're still making 1%. And you have to ask yourself, is it now worth paying someone $10,000 a year to manage your 1 million? It's actually not that much harder to manage $1 million than it is $100,000. But this is why financial advisors love working with residents and early career physicians, because once they gain their loyalty, our salaries become, or our investments become a cash cow for these financial advisors. Again, not saying they're bad people, that's just how the incentives work. A third way is called fee-based. And the way this works is that you pay them an hourly fee for service. You book them for 2 hours, they do an extra hour of work on the side, you pay them 3 hours worth of an hourly fee. And this fee is independent of your portfolio. So it does not matter to you what you do with your money. It just matters how much time they spend. There's a problem with this. They can still sell you things and they can still make commissions off products they sell you, similar to the first payment model we talked about. And then there's fee only. You pay them an hourly fee for their service. That fee is independent of your portfolio, and that's the only money the financial advisor makes. This is generally considered the most pure, conflict-free version of financial advisor compensation, because now it does not matter to the financial advisor what you do with your money. It's just their sole interest is to help you do the best that you can, and you pay them for their time. Do not confuse fee-based with fee only. I've run across financial advisors who wanted to present to my fellows, and they told me they were fee-based, and I learned luckily enough in time that they were not fee only, and I told them, no, sorry, not putting you in front of our fellows. So if you do decide to hire a financial advisor, a few things you should do. Confirm in writing that they operate under a fiduciary standard for all their services. The fiduciary standards means that there is a legal requirement that they have to give you advice or sell you products that is in your best interest, and they have to put your interest ahead of theirs. And this is a big deal, because if you can show that they didn't, you can sue them. I've also bolded all their services, and that's because financial advisors can sometimes be fiduciary in some areas, but not others. Like they may be fiduciary when they are managing your long-term retirement investments, but they're not necessarily fiduciary when they sell you a life insurance policy, right? It can be very tough to distinguish. So you want to make sure they operate in writing under a fiduciary standard for all the services they're giving you. Ideally, you want to find an advisor who has a few qualities. Ideally, you have a certified financial planner or charter financial analyst designation, so that you know they're not just more than a glorified salesman. Ideally, this is somebody who cares more about your life goals than their spreadsheets, right? Or than your numbers. If a financial advisor starts talking to you about Roth IRAs and safe withdrawal rates first, instead of talking about what your why is, what your goals are, you may want someone else, because there's a lot of financial advisors who are a lot more empathetic, and they really care about your life goals and what's important to you and your family. Ideally, especially if you're dealing with loans, you want an advisor who's up to date with loan repayment, refinancing, and loan forgiveness options. As you can imagine, this is kind of a niche market. Not all financial advisors have this. And if you can, you want an advisor who specializes in doctors at your career stage, so that they're familiar with the issues that you're dealing with. In my personal opinion, is even if you outsource everything to a financial advisor, that does not give you the excuse not to care about your money. Nobody should care more about your money than you. So we've now accomplished 4 objectives. We've talked about wellness being the sole focus of your financial planning. Hopefully, I've kept you up to date about student loan refinancing and public service loan forgiveness. I hope all of you now really want to commit to working, because being in a situation where you can work because you want to and not because you have to. And now you have some idea of how to be a smart consumer of the financial industry. So I will sum up the main take-home points in just a little bit. But first, I want to ask if you have any questions or thoughts, and feel free to free text your questions or thoughts anonymously on the Poll Everywhere site. Or I also have the chat window open on Zoom, and you can feel free to ask there, or I guess you can unmute your mic and also ask. So go ahead. If you have any questions, please feel free to share them at this point. Okay, question from Gianna. Do you have thoughts on how much residents and fellows should start investing in retirement during training? Great question. The short answer is that the amount is not important. It will not move the needle in the long run. The important thing is that you start exercising that muscle early and get used to investing, even if it's just $100 a month or something like that. Because if you don't do it as a resident, you won't do it when you start your first job. So the amount doesn't matter as much. All right. A lot of questions coming in. So let me start going. Do you feel a Roth IRA or 401k is more important to prioritize contribution? My gosh, that really depends on your tax situation. And for example, if you are in a low tax bracket, such as being a resident, oh, Roth makes total sense. If you're in your peak earnings years, maybe not. Maybe a traditional is a little bit better because then you can get that tax deduction at the higher rate. But again, it also depends on what you think tax brackets are going to be when you retire. So very complicated question that's different for everyone. Any specific advice for those of us with private loans from the start? Yeah, if you can refinance to a lower interest rate, do it. You got nothing to lose. All those cons we talked about do not apply to you. Yeah, get the lowest rate you can and get a cashback bonus while you're at it. How do you prioritize savings for financial independence with savings for things like children's plans? Yeah, great question, right? I got 2 kids under 5. I'm thinking about the same thing. The way I would think about this is, imagine your children are now 20 years old and you want to ask them, hey, my son, Bobby, would you rather take out loans for your college education, or would you rather support me in my own age because I didn't save enough? My guess is your kid is going to rather take out loans. And you can't, and unlike them, you can't take out loans for your retirement. So generally, people placing your financial independence should generally be a higher priority than your children's college plans. That's how I think about it. It's a personal opinion. It's one that's shared by a lot of people. Reasonable people might disagree, but most people would say that your own financial independence is probably a bigger deal, because if you're not independent, you're going to be dependent on your kids anyway. And hopefully they'll help you out. Thoughts about distributing money between a Roth versus a regular 401k really depends on your tax situation. Generally speaking, and this is broad strokes, higher tax bracket, probably a regular makes sense. If you're in a lower tax bracket, a Roth makes sense. But again, if you're thinking that tax rates are going to go up later on and you want to prepay at what you think is a lower rate, then you might do for a Roth. I know people who kind of hedge their bets and they do a little bit on either one. Very personal thing. But the way to think about it is, what's your tax rate now? What do you think your tax rate is going to be at retirement? Are you better off prepaying at current rates, or do you want to wait till later? That's basically the idea. Thoughts on investment options for 1099 incomes. How can you invest that side hustle income? Wow. Well, if you have a 1099 and you have an EIN, an employer identification number, you can open up a solo 401k. And that is a separate investment option they can put it in. Now, there are some rules. I think you can only invest about 20% or so in a solo 401k. How would you suggest finding a reliable financial advisor? And let me just skim how many questions we have. All right. What time is it? I got time. We can go through all of them. How would you suggest finding a reliable financial advisor? And Thomas on the chat asked the same thing. Well, there are a lot of physician blogs that focus on financial literacy that have recommended pages. And I have no financial relationship with these. These tend to be for-profit blogs, and those links that they give you to financial advisors, they tend to be vetted by them if you trust them, but they have a financial relationship. When you click on that link, the blogger gets a kickback. So, but if you look at commonly used ones are Whitecone Investor. That's probably the most, whitecoateinvestor.com is probably one of the most well-known financial sites. It's founded by Dr. James Daly, an emergency medicine physician in Utah, who, I think you can accurately say has given financial literacy to an entire generation of physicians. It is a very for-profit blog, and he makes a lot of money off of it. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at the list. I have no financial relationship. Otherwise, word of mouth, interview your financial advisor and ask them those questions that I posed. And let's see. At what point in your career should you consider meeting with a financial advisor? There's no real right answer to that. If you're a medical student and you have a negative net worth, a financial advisor who gets paid with an AUM fee may not be very interested in you. A lot of times they have a minimum, like you have to do a minimum of 50,000 or so. But a fee only hourly type thing, no harm in paying a few $100s to meet with them early on to set your plan. I have actually personally, I've interviewed a couple financial advisors. I've actually never used one. I'll probably change that later this year. I probably will, have a second look by a fee-only financial advisor. But there's no real right answer. It really is what's going to let you sleep well, and do formulate a plan that's going to let you live your why, right? If you can do that without an advisor, great. If you want help with that, no reason not to. What's a more reasonable amount to pay in fees to a financial advisor? Gosh, I have no idea. It's all over the place. Usually it's somewhere like in the realm of like a few $100s an hour if you're talking about a fee only. And like I said, there's the AUM model as well. 15-year mortgage versus a 30-year mortgage. I don't know how much debt you have, how big your house is. It really depends, right? If you're using a 15-year mortgage, you're going to have a lower interest rate, but you're going to have higher payments and you have less flexibility. If your cash flow can handle that, then yeah, you're going to save a lot of money. If you want the flexibility at the expense of paying more over the long term, a 30-year mortgage makes sense. You can always refinance it. Anecdotally, do you find that your colleagues working in academics or private practice reach financial independence more quickly or easily? I have no idea, because finances are such a taboo topic in medicine. Nobody talks about it. And I'm in academics myself. And I think there's this unspoken rule that nobody talks about the medicine because we all make, our salaries in the 10th to 20th percentile. So I have no idea. But the general sense I get is that physicians in general are not very good at doing this. And we also tend to be workaholics and not really think about the why, or thinking about working because we want to. We're just used to being good soldiers and soldiering on. So I really can't say anything of value to answer that question. Let's see. Recommendations to residents about how much to pay for a house. Many doctors become attendings. Many doctors, when they become attendings, have a rise in salary, buy very expensive houses, and become house poor. Yeah. All right, I'm going to go out on a limb here. This is a personal opinion and one that is shared by many others. If you're a resident, you have no business buying a house. And I say this as somebody who graduated in 2009. So I had a lot of classmates who bought houses in 2006, 2007 when we were students. And when the housing market tanked, they had to fly and become unwilling out-of-state landlords because they were in over their head over their mortgage. And I thank my lucky stars that I rented. I just packed everything up, put it in my Ford Focus, and drove out of town. Generally speaking, I don't think you should sink money on a house unless you're in a very stable situation. Like you're not going to be leaving for at least ideally, you're going to be there for at least 5 years in your current career. You're not going to have any big changes like having a kid that suddenly you need a bigger house, that kind of thing. Generally speaking, I highly discourage residents and fellows from buying a house unless you're going to, for sure you're going to be there for at least 5 years. It would be useful for pre-med students to take a personal finance course in college. Yep. Also med school. Yep. Also, can I say all America? But yes, particularly for us, we're terrible at it. What do you recommend as an introductory resource for getting more familiar with investing? Yeah. With the caveat that, so actually, I'll tell you where I got my start. Personal Finance for Dummies. Seriously, by Eric Tyson. That book changed my life. And I read this as a student, and I was so broke I didn't even buy it. I got it from the library. It is a fantastic resource to know how to get started with basic investing, and that's really what got me started. And I just took off from there. Let's see, other questions. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Dr. Christmas. And F. Chan should also consider life insurance as part of financial independence. Okay, yeah. I didn't talk about what I call financial defense, like insurance, but yeah, generally speaking, if there is, one of the saddest things I see is if a resident or physician passes away, which is tragic enough already, but then I see that somebody is starting a GoFundMe page for their kids. That is simply heartbreaking. Because if you are a physician, actually, if you are anybody with whom somebody's financial well-being depends on you, meaning if you were to die, somebody else will be worse off. Your kid, your elderly parent, your pet dog, whatever. You need a life insurance policy. And it's not that expensive to buy a term life insurance policy. And I stress term life. Don't get suckered into buying a whole life from your financial advisor. Separate issue, its own talk. But if there is anybody who would be financially worse off if you were to die, you need life insurance. And while that's not important for your financial independence, it's important for those people that you love and care about who depend on you. I think we went through all the questions. Let me make sure I covered everything. Okay, wonderful, great questions. So what I will do here is end by summing up with 4 takeaways from today's talk that I hope all of you leave with. 1, this is the most important one. Understand your why. Let it drive every decision you make, financial or otherwise. Number 2, your debt to income ratio is a key factor if you are dealing with student loans and trying to come up with a strategy that makes sense for you, whether it involves refinancing, public service loan forgiveness, or neither. Invest at least 20% of your salary for your own financial independence if you ever want to hit that point where you're working because you want to, not because you have to. And never trust a financial educator if you don't fully understand what's in it for them. All right. Thank you very much, and good night to you all. Feel free to reach out to me if you have further questions. And again, thank you to the Maryland ACP for the chance to talk to you guys, and Dr. Kiro and Dr. Gulati. Thank you so much.